Hello, I'm Benjamin Fry, and today we're going to be talking about holding space as a way of regulating the nervous system. In other videos, I've been talking about boundaries and containment as a way of moderating the way that we behave when we have a dysregulated nervous system. So the idea here is that there's a lot of unfinished business in the nervous system, which comes from the evolutionary heritage of the way that we respond to threat, and that some things are so overwhelming we freeze, and then we as humans don't perfectly recover from these freezes by discharging all that energy. The leftover material, the unfinished business or the unfinished response to an earlier threat, becomes a kind of dysregulation in our nervous system, and it means that subsequent efforts to respond to threat are either overreacted to or underreacted to. The goal is to have a nervous system that has no unfinished business, and therefore our reactions are just right, or a Goldilocks response. Now, we've looked at how we might be able to simulate that in two different ways. One way is that the things that come at us in life, we often call our triggers. These hit our baggage and create exaggerated responses, or sometimes responses that are so enormous we can't handle them at all and we completely close down and freeze. So we thought about this as, say, a 3 out of 10 trigger hits unfinished business, our baggage, and creates maybe a 9 out of 10 reaction, or a 0 out of 10 reaction, which is even worse, which is when we're totally shut down. The two techniques to deal with this are called boundaries and containment. Boundaries are something that push back on the triggers, so reducing the trigger from 3 to 2 to 1 to maybe nothing. And the containment works the other way. Boundaries are kind of like keeping the world there. Containment keeps my reaction, my inner world, here. So I don't flood the outside world with stuff that is really my business from well before the moment that we're dealing with right now. So there I might have a reaction that's 5 or 6 or 7 out of 10. I might be able to hold it down to 2 or 3. So I might actually end up, like Goldilocks, receiving a trigger that's 3 out of 10 and having a reaction that's 3 out of 10. But meanwhile, I've had to do a lot of work. So I've had to create a boundary system to keep the triggers at bay. And then I've had to create a containment system to keep me, if you like, as a trigger at bay. But there's a very nice and important thing that happens when I do, which is that if you think about a picture where you're holding the world out there a bit, but you're also holding yourself in here a bit, what you're doing is you're creating like a bubble. So it becomes like a bubble. If it goes all the way around, it's like this wonderful bubble, this space around my nervous system. So inside the bubble, there's room for my nervous system to react less, but also when it does react, to hold on to that reaction more. And holding on to it doesn't mean squashing it. It doesn't mean deleting it. It doesn't mean freezing or shutting down. It just means that there's space for the reaction to happen in. And I can start to metabolize my reaction in that space. Now this has a lovely parallel with what should happen ideally to humans and even all mammals as they develop and grow up in life. The perfect start for a young human mammal is that it is enveloped in what we might consider to be the mother's space. So babies are not dysregulated, but they're not old enough yet to have good regulation. They're a bit all over the place. Anyone who's hung out with babies know how easily and how quickly and how totally they can become distressed. And what happens when a baby gets distressed? It gets held, right? So a mother or a mother substitute will intuitively understand that distress. But there's no talking to the baby. You can't rationalize with this. This isn't a brain thing. This is a nervous system somatic thing. And what you need to do is you need to hold a baby and regulate it. And actually, part of what's regulating a baby is the mother's energy, the larger system. The mother isn't distressed. The mother isn't freaking out. The mother will hold the baby, sing to it, rock it, swaddle it, but in a very deep way, hold the nervous system with the robustness of her own nervous system. Now, many people who have what we would consider to be dysregulated nervous systems have not had enough of that in their childhood. They may have had some of it, and it may have been nobody's fault, but nonetheless, their nervous system has not been held and regulated enough to the point where it could discharge and complete all of its reactions to earlier threats. So there's a need for more. And the good news is that as adults with the dysregulated nervous systems that come from childhood, we're capable of holding that space now for ourselves. So if we hold boundaries and if we hold containment, it's like this two-hander where we can keep the world out, but we can keep ourselves in. And that's actually what you need to create a bubble. That's how a bubble is born. There's a tension keeping it from exploding, and there's a tension keeping it from imploding. It creates a space. So the good news is that by learning these techniques of boundaries and containment, we actually can start to reparent ourselves in a very fundamental way. You often hear in psychology and psychotherapy about people reparenting themselves or looking after their inner child or doing inner child work or being, mothering themselves, nurturing themselves. This is a great way to do it, and it's actually not particularly woolly. It involves some very specific techniques which have space for the nervous system to not be too reactive and space for the nervous system's reactions not to be abandoned or sprayed all over the place. And in doing this, there becomes a kind of metabolizing effect of myself as an adult, on myself as an unfinished infant. And that's very empowering, because so much of the feeling of growing up in a dysregulated nervous system is that life is out of control, or that I'm out of control. And there's often a regret or a sense that this is because childhood was out of control. So I can start to take back control of the space that I'm held in, which then starts to give me back control of the nervous system that I'm living with, which then starts to give me more control over productive behavior in my life in the present day. So, although nervous system theory can seem quite esoteric and it can come from ideas of evolution and hundreds of millions of years of looking at reptile fossils and fish fossils and mammal behavior, in the end it comes down to some very simple choices in our lives in the present day. Is how we're going to nurture the nervous system we have, not the ideal one we wish we had, but the one we actually have, and how we're going to make sure that we relieve the world of the consequences of our own reactions to things that aren't all about what's happening here and now. And if we do that, the beautiful thing is that we begin to become parents to ourselves again. We begin to give ourselves everything that we were distressed that we didn't get, maybe as children or adolescents or as adults. So I heartily recommend to you engaging with the ideas of boundaries and containment, not just for their own sake, but because there's a bigger picture here, which is that we create a space, and in that space we get to grow up again, we get to be nurtured again, and we get to heal, and we get to become the adults that we always wanted to be. Thank you for listening to my video. If you like the ideas in this video, you'll find more of them in my recent book, The Invisible Lion, and you can find out all about that and the resources to support it at theinvisiblelion.com.